The wilderness has always been a place of beauty and danger, but for these four campers, it became a nightmare they'll never forget. Imagine the peace of the forest, the gentle rustling of leaves, the scent of pine needles beneath your feet, and then imagine that peace shattered by an experience so terrifying it defies explanation. What began as peaceful trips into nature quickly transformed into encounters with the unexplainable, forcing them to question what truly lurks beyond the tree line when darkness falls. These are not ghost stories told around a campfire. These are documented events that authorities still struggle to explain, and one of them contains evidence so disturbing it was initially classified by local police. We're about to dive deep into the heart of the unknown, exploring the chilling true stories of campers who ventured into the wilderness and came face to face with something they couldn't explain. Stay with me until the end to learn what makes that final story different from any camping horror you've ever heard before. Trust me, you do not want to miss this. Our first story takes us deep into the heart of Yosemite National Park, a place of breathtaking beauty, known for its towering granite cliffs and ancient sequoia trees. It's July 1978, and a troop of 12 Boy Scouts led by their scoutmaster embarked on a week-long backpacking trip. They were excited, prepared, ready for adventure. They set off into the wilderness, their laughter echoing through the trees, completely unaware of the darkness that awaited them. Days turned into nights, their journey marked by laughter, shared stories, and the simple joys of nature. But on the third day, something went terribly wrong. The day started like any other, the sun filtering through the canopy, the air crisp and cool. They broke camp, packed their gear, and set off on the trail. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows through the trees, they reached their intended campsite near a secluded lake. But something wasn't right. The clearing was eerily silent, the usual sounds of nature replaced by an unsettling stillness. There was no sign of recent human activity, no charred wood from a campfire, no scattered supplies, no footprints in the dirt. It was as though the forest itself was holding its breath. Concern turned to fear as they searched for any indication of what may have happened. Had another group come through and dismantled a previous campsite? Had they gotten their dates mixed up? The scoutmaster tried to remain calm, but a knot of dread tightened in his stomach. The silence was unnerving, broken only by the rustling leaves and the distant call of a lonely bird. As darkness descended, so did a chilling realization. The troop was gone, vanished. They searched for hours, their calls echoing unanswered through the growing darkness. Our next story takes us to the dense forests of the Pacific Northwest, where a young couple's romantic camping trip took a terrifying turn. Imagine sitting by a crackling fire, the warmth radiating on your face as the darkness presses in around you. The air is filled with the scent of pine needles and wood smoke, the only sounds the crackling flames and the gentle whisper of the wind through the trees. This is what Emily and Jake were looking forward to when they set out on their weekend getaway. They found the perfect spot nestled among towering pines, a secluded clearing bathed in the soft glow of the setting sun. As they worked together to set up camp, a comfortable silence fell between them, punctuated by the occasional shared smile or knowing glance. They were completely alone, surrounded by nothing but the beauty of nature, or so they thought. As night fell and the stars twinkled above, they built a campfire, the flames casting flickering shadows that danced among the trees. They shared stories, laughter, and quiet moments of contentment, the cares of everyday life melting away with each passing hour. But as they sat there, lost in their own little world, a strange feeling crept over them, a prickling sensation at the back of their necks. It started subtly, a sense of being watched, a feeling that something was off. They couldn't shake the feeling that they were not alone. At first they dismissed it as their imaginations running wild. After all, they were deep in the wilderness and it was natural to feel a little on edge. But as the night wore on, the feeling intensified. They started hearing things, a twig snapping in the distance, the rustling of leaves, a low growl that seemed to come from just beyond the circle of firelight. Then, Emily saw it. A faint light, flickering in the distance like another campfire through the trees. It was strange, she thought, because they were miles from any other campsites. Curious, she pointed it out to Jake, and together they stared into the darkness, trying to make sense of what they were seeing. As they watched, the light grew brighter, casting eerie shadows that danced among the trees. It was definitely a campfire, they realized, but it was unlike any campfire they had ever seen before. The flames seemed to burn an unnatural color, a sickly green that cast an unsettling glow on the surrounding woods. The couple exchanged worried glances, their earlier sense of peace now replaced by a growing unease. They knew they had to investigate, but fear held them back. What could be causing such an eerie phenomenon? They had no idea, but they were about to find out. Chapter 3. Our third story takes us to the rugged wilderness of the Appalachian Mountains, where a seasoned hiker's solo camping trip became a desperate fight for survival. Imagine the feeling of solitude, of being surrounded by nothing but the raw, untamed beauty of nature. The kind of isolation that can be both a blessing and a curse. That's what drew Mark, an experienced outdoorsman, to the Appalachian Trail year after year. The call of the wild was irresistible to him. He relished the challenge, the opportunity to test his limits and find peace in the solitude of the mountains. It was his sanctuary, a place where he could escape the chaos of everyday life. He knew the trail like the back of his hand, or so he thought. Every twist and turn was etched in his memory. This time, however, something felt different, off. An inexplicable sense of unease settled over him. The air itself seemed heavier, filled with an unspoken tension that set his teeth on edge. It was as if the forest was holding its breath. He dismissed it as fatigue, pushing onward, his boots crunching on the fallen leaves. The familiar sound was oddly comforting. He set up camp near a stream, the sound of rushing water a comforting melody in the stillness of the evening. It was a perfect spot, or so it seemed. But as darkness fell, the silence around him grew louder, punctuated by strange and unsettling sounds. The forest seemed to come alive with whispers. It began with a twig snapping, the sound echoing through the stillness, too close to his campsite for comfort. His senses went on high alert. He froze, listening intently, his hand instinctively reaching for the hunting knife he kept sheathed at his hip. Silence, the kind that makes your heart pound in your ears. He convinced himself it was just an animal, a deer perhaps, or a raccoon foraging for food. He tried to rationalize the fear gnawing at him. He took a deep breath, trying to calm his racing heart, but a shiver ran down his spine. The feeling of being watched was undeniable. Then, the sounds came again, this time closer, a rustling in the underbrush, heavy footsteps that seemed to circle his campsite. His pulse quickened. He strained his ears, trying to identify the source of the noise, but the darkness held its secrets close. The forest was a maze of shadows and sounds. Fear, cold and sharp, pierced through his gut. This was no animal. The realization hit him like a punch to the stomach. He built up the fire, the flames casting flickering shadows that danced among the trees, providing little comfort against the unseen terror that surrounded him. The night was far from over. Chapter 4. Our final story, the one with the classified evidence, takes us to the desolate plains of West Texas, where a group of friends' camping trip unearthed something so disturbing, so profoundly unsettling, that it remains shrouded in mystery to this day. This tale is not just a story, but a chilling reminder of the unknown, lurking in the most unexpected places. Picture this, a vast expanse of scrubland stretching out beneath a star-filled sky, the air thick with the scent of sagebrush and dust. The kind of place where the silence is so profound, it almost has a presence of its own. This is where Sarah, Ben, Maria, and Chris, lifelong friends with a shared love of adventure, decided to spend their spring break. They had been planning this trip for months, eager to escape the mundane routine of their daily lives. They were drawn to the area's stark beauty, its isolation offering a welcome escape from the hustle and bustle of city life. The desert, with its vast open spaces and rugged terrain, promised a sense of freedom they craved. They set up camp near an abandoned ranch, the dilapidated buildings casting eerie shadows in the fading light. The ranch, once a bustling hub of activity, now stood as a silent testament to a bygone era. As they unloaded their gear, a sense of unease settled over them, an unspoken feeling that they were not alone. It was as if the very air around them was charged with an unseen energy. They dismissed it as their imaginations running wild, fueled by the stories they had heard about the area being a hotbed for strange and unexplained phenomena. Tales of ghostly apparitions and mysterious lights were common in these parts. They built a campfire, the flames crackling merrily, providing a semblance of warmth and security in the vast emptiness that surrounded them. The firelight danced on their faces, casting long shadows that flickered and swayed. They were determined to enjoy their trip, to make the most of their time together. Laughter and camaraderie filled the air, momentarily dispelling the eerie atmosphere. They shared stories, laughter echoing through the stillness, their voices a feeble attempt to break the unsettling silence that seemed to press in on them from all sides. The desert, however, seemed to absorb their joy, leaving an underlying tension. But as the night wore on, the feeling of unease intensified. The vast open desert that had seemed so inviting during the day now felt oppressive and menacing. It started subtly, a flickering light in the distance, a series of strange symbols carved into the side of an abandoned barn. Symbols that seemed to pulse with a life of their own. They brushed it off as a prank, a way for the locals to scare off trespassers, but deep down, they couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. Then things took a sinister turn. The air grew colder, and an unnatural stillness settled over the camp. One night, Maria, an aspiring photographer, decided to capture the ethereal beauty of the night sky with her new video camera. She had always been fascinated by the stars, and this seemed like the perfect opportunity. She set up her tripod, framing the shot, the vastness of the cosmos reflected in her wide, curious eyes. The stars twinkled like diamonds against the velvet backdrop of the night. As she hit record, a blood-curdling scream pierced the stillness, echoing across the desolate landscape. It was Sarah. The scream was so sudden and so intense that it sent shivers down Maria's spine. Maria swung around, her heart pounding in her chest, the camera still rolling, capturing the frantic scene unfolding before her. The friends were in a state of panic, their faces pale with fear. Sarah stood frozen in terror, her eyes wide with fear, her finger pointing towards a figure standing at the edge of the firelight. The figure seemed to be watching them, its presence sending a wave of dread through the group. The figure was tall and slender, its form shrouded in shadow, its movements jerky and unnatural. It was as if it didn't belong to this world. It moved with an eerie fluidity, its limbs bending at impossible angles, as if it were a puppet controlled by unseen strings. The sight was both mesmerizing and horrifying. Maria zoomed in with the camera, her hand trembling, trying to get a clearer shot of the figure, but the darkness seemed to swallow the light, obscuring its features. It was as if the figure was made of shadows itself. Then, as quickly as it had appeared, the figure vanished, melting into the shadows, leaving behind a chilling silence that was more terrifying than any scream. The silence was so profound, it felt like a physical presence. Shaken to their core, they packed up their gear and fled. The memory of that night seared into their minds. They couldn't get away fast enough, the fear driving them to move with a speed they didn't know they possessed. They couldn't shake the feeling that they had stumbled upon something ancient and evil, something that was not meant to be seen by human eyes. The desert, once a place of beauty and adventure, had revealed a dark, sinister side that would haunt them forever. Campers, hikers, adventurers, they all venture into the wilderness, seeking solace, beauty, maybe a little thrill. But these stories remind us that the wilderness holds secrets, some we may never understand. We're left with the question, what else is out there, lurking just beyond the campfire light, hidden in the shadows of the trees? These stories are unsettling, I know, but they serve as a reminder to be aware, to be prepared, and to respect the power of the unknown. Because sometimes the most terrifying monsters are the ones we can't explain. So, the next time you find yourself gazing into a campfire, remember these stories, and ask yourself, are you truly alone in the wilderness?